All right, so we're continuing on in Chapter 2. We're dealing now more with the idea of visualizations. We did talk in the previous parts about Chapter 2, dealing with nature of data and also, of course, statistical measures. So this series of presentations will be more about data visualization. So with that, let's getting started. One thing to take note of, especially when it comes to the past area of where does visual information come into play, a lot of it comes into decision making. And we look over here on this picture, and I always want to point out this individual here, and they are the decision maker. Now, we create a lot of data in our organizations. So there's always factories, and they perform all of these business functions, no matter what they might be. And as a result, it creates some data that we end up storing. But it is when that data gets processed here in this step that it creates something that we can see. Now, in the old business intelligence mindset, this is typical reporting. This is usually historical, and it enables us to be able to identify what has happened. Now, the good thing about this is that going to the decision maker, then they can go ahead and make additional decisions. So moving forward, they can have an action which will go back into the organization to make those particular decisions. So those reports are the beginning of the decision-making process. So what's a business report? It's a written document to aid managerial decisions. It usually comes from data that is typically from the inside of the organization, but may come from the outside. And it's tables, graphs, charts. And nowadays, rarely things are distributed via a printout, but it does happen. And of course, it gets emailed to most of the people. So, or most of the decision makers, and make a point of that. So the whole idea about business reports is we acquire data, generate information, make a decision, and go back to our business processes to move our organization forward. Now, there's three types of business reports. Metric management reports. A lot of times, we've always had conversations about our gas gauge, and we might see a gauge on our management report that might be have some kind of fields across it, and to the left might be a red color, and to the right may be a green color, and that would indicate good. So if our gauge is to the right, that might be something that visually we can see with our data that will give us some indicators about things like key performance indicators, or other types of objectives that might be for the organization. Um, the other type of business report is a dashboard type, and this is where I was kind of getting into a little bit more of the dials and the gauges. And the last is a balanced scorecard report. It looks at categories such as financial categories, customer categories, business process categories, and learning and growth indicators. And depending on the business and what is considered to be a priority, usually the type of report that is generated and required by decision makers is dictated. But as we get into this topic more, we're going to start focusing in more on the idea of data visualization. Now, why do we worry about data visualization? Well, with the aspect of time, we have now learned more and more about the data around us. We have fuel gauges, we have thermometers, we get star ratings on our products, and decision making puts us into this state of readiness, which is the whole idea that we are ready to make a decision. Even if you see a product that you're interested in purchasing that has a 5-star review, you know it's good, right? But you may not make that decision right away until another indicator pops up, like maybe the amount of money you have in your bank account. Right? But pilots look at dashboards a lot, right? So we have a indicator on the horizon, we have a compass, we have an altimeter, and so on and so forth. So pilots have to always take a look at all of this data in order to be able to fly their planes. Well, that is exactly what we are doing with dashboards and visualizations, is that we're making the data available to us in a way that we can consume quickly and easily, so that way we can perform decision-making tasks like flying a plane. All right, so what is data visualization? Our textbook gives us one definition, and there's other definitions out there. One of the things that we really want to focus on with the idea of data visualizations is that the visualization has to add value to the data, giving it meaning, right? So if we go ahead and plot some graph, right, and we have some graph that's out there, this has to give us some kind of meaning. So what we might want to indicate on this graph is like a threshold line that will go across the top. And we know that when this performance of our business goes above this threshold line, that could give it some kind of context. So that's a value. Also, it gives us information for making decisions. So, for example, we talk about our gauge. Well, if our gauge is in the other direction, right, and we might have a threshold line, and obviously the gauge on the right is below that threshold line because it goes in this direction, we now have to make a decision. So our data visualization has to be not just connected to our data, but it has to have context, and it has to provide us some kind of information that will bring us into some decision-making aspect. Now, reports in the past used to explain what has happened. The idea of visual analytics is to start giving us the idea of what will happen. Oh, I'm sorry. So, what will happen when we start to look at historical data? For example, if I have a graph and we see it's doing this, right? Can I forecast what's going to happen next, right? This is an idea about what will happen, right? Also, we can see that history may have had certain products, and let's say this is product A, B, C, and D, and they had certain products that were sold last year. Well, we know A and B sold a lot last year, and maybe by seeing this, we can see that we need to focus on more on AB, because this gives us an idea that most likely A and B will sell again this year. So remember, we have to start looking at our visualizations not just into looking backwards, right, which is typical reports, but now starting to look forward as to what will happen and why will it happen. Right? So the why will it happen, and we're looking at past trends to decide what's going to happen in the future. All right, so there's a lot of software that is starting to become more and more available. Like in this class, we've been using Tableau. Maybe in future classes, we might be using Power BI, or in your job, you might use Power BI. But other companies such as SAS and SAP have also started to hit the market. And this is an old, what do I call it, a Magic Quadrant. You know, it was published in 2014. So there's a good idea that some more of these data visualization companies will start to move up into the upper right-hand quadrant of this Magic Quadrant. But I wanted to illustrate with you that there are some companies that are making that push towards data analytics software.